Once people accept that protein is important, the next question almost always comes right behind it. Okay, but can you have too much? This concern shows up everywhere. In casual conversations, in comment sections, and in official-sounding advice that warns against excess without ever defining what excess actually means. Protein is treated as something that's helpful in moderation, but risky if you push it too far. That framing sounds reasonable. After all, most things can be harmful in excess. But when you look closely at where this fear comes from, you find that it's rarely based on clear evidence of harm in healthy adults. Instead, it's built from a collection of assumptions, misapplied contexts, and vague warnings that never quite connect to real outcomes. The first problem is that too much is almost never defined. People will say that high protein is dangerous, but they don't say at what level, in what population, or by what mechanism. The warning floats in the abstract, which makes it feel serious without being testable. When a risk isn't quantified, it's hard to challenge. Another issue is that protein gets lumped together with very different concerns. Sometimes the fear is about kidneys, sometimes it's about bone health, sometimes it's about longevity, cancer, or overloading the body. These concerns get grouped under the same umbrella, even though they come from different lines of reasoning and different types of evidence. That makes protein sound broadly dangerous, even when the specific claims don't hold up. There's also a strong influence from how official recommendations are framed. Many protein guidelines are designed to answer a very narrow question: what is the minimum amount needed to avoid deficiency in the average sedentary person? They are not designed to answer questions about training, aging, recovery, or long-term muscle maintenance. But when those minimums are treated as optimal targets, or worse, as upper limits, people assume that going beyond them must be risky. So enough quietly becomes too much. Another driver of this fear is the idea that the body has a fixed capacity for handling protein, and that exceeding it somehow overwhelms normal systems. You'll hear phrases like, "the body can only use so much protein," or "excess protein just gets wasted," or "it puts unnecessary strain on the system." But the body doesn't handle protein the way it handles a toxin. Protein is not a foreign substance. It's a fundamental building material. The body is constantly breaking down and rebuilding proteins in muscle, organs, enzymes, immune cells, and connective tissue. That process never stops. When protein intake increases, the body doesn't panic. It adjusts digestion, absorption, amino acid oxidation, and excretion to match intake. These systems are flexible, not fragile. This is why the idea of a sharp cutoff, where protein suddenly becomes dangerous past a certain point, doesn't match how human physiology actually works. That doesn't mean protein intake is irrelevant. It means the relationship is gradual, context-dependent, and constrained by appetite, energy intake, and overall health, not by a narrow toxicity threshold. Another source of confusion is that protein often travels alongside other variables. Diets labeled high protein in observational studies are rarely controlled increases in protein alone. They may also differ in calorie intake, food quality, body weight, physical activity, and metabolic health. If a population consuming more protein also has higher body weight or poorer metabolic health, protein can get blamed for outcomes driven by those other factors. Protein becomes the visible variable, not necessarily the causal one. This is especially true when headlines simplify findings. A study might observe an association between higher protein intake and some outcome in a specific population under specific conditions. That nuance disappears, and what reaches the public is a warning stripped of context. High protein linked to risk. Linked is not the same as caused. There's also a psychological angle. Protein is associated with muscle, and muscle is often framed as aesthetic or optional. So warnings about protein don't feel like warnings against something essential. If the same warnings were issued about essential fats or oxygen, people would demand clarity. With protein, vague caution feels acceptable. But muscle is not cosmetic. It is metabolically active tissue. It plays a role in glucose regulation, physical function, injury resistance, and recovery from illness. Losing it quietly over time has real consequences, especially as people age. So when people restrict protein out of fear, the trade-off isn't neutral. They're not just avoiding a hypothetical risk. They may be increasing a very predictable one. Another reason the too much protein idea persists is that protein is often discussed in isolation, as if it exists independently of total energy intake. But protein intake is constrained by calories. Very high protein intake usually requires either high total calories or deliberate effort. Most people do not accidentally eat extreme amounts of protein. Appetite, satiety, and food preferences limit intake naturally. In practice, people worrying about too much protein are usually eating amounts that are modestly above minimum recommendations, not extreme. The fear is disconnected from actual behavior. This creates a strange situation where people are anxious about a level of intake they're not even close to reaching, while underconsumption remains common and unaddressed. It's also worth noting that many of the populations who benefit most from higher protein intake, older adults, people trying to preserve muscle, people recovering from injury, people lifting weights, are the very groups most likely to be told to be careful with protein. The caution lands hardest where the benefit is greatest. That doesn't mean there's no upper limit in any sense. It means that for healthy adults, the range of intakes that support health is broad, and the range that causes harm is not something people typically stumble into through normal eating. Context matters. Activity level matters. Health status matters. But blanket fear does not help people navigate those factors. So when someone asks whether too much protein is dangerous, the honest answer isn't a dramatic warning or a casual dismissal. It's this. For most healthy adults, the bigger risk is not eating too much protein. It's eating too little for too long, especially while expecting the body to stay strong, resilient, and functional. In the next episode, we'll talk about why lifting weights changes nutrition needs, and why advice designed for sedentary people often fails those who train. For now, the key idea is simple. Protein is not a narrow substance with a sharp danger line. It's a fundamental building material, and fear-based limits often say more about misplaced caution than real risk. This is Protein Truth.